Before I call upon the next speaker, Mr. Bhasin has an announcement.
I have great pleasure in welcoming, you see, our chief guest, Mr. Anil Goswami, the Home Secretary who's here. Please, thank you. Thank you, sir.
I now call upon the next speaker from Indraprastha College, Krishna Singh, who will speak against the motion.
No, I rely on you to give me some extra time. Madam Chairperson, respected judges, dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the IP College, I beg to oppose the motion. According to the Oxford Dictionary, I start straight away to save time. Governance simply means the action or style of governing. It cannot therefore be in isolation of other happenings. I mention this because much has already been said about the background and the circumstances, and I therefore save my time. Just like good or bad governance by the bureaucracy impacts the lives of the governed, isn't it true that the general political and social happenings, erosion of values, also impact the bureaucracy? Historically, the expectations from bureaucracy was what? Administration of justice, maintenance of law and order. With rapid growth, rising population, and we may soon become the most populous nation of the world, even though we have demographic dividends. With rapid globalization, urbanization, etc., bureaucracy has an enlarged role and cannot remain immune from the new challenges. They are naturally expected to change fast. A shift in emphasis to development requirements meant that resources had to be stretched on every front, including administrative outreach. What did this imply? Capacity building, reorientation in the mindset at all levels. Number two, a dedicated approach accompanied by high standards of integrity. Did the two happen? If it happened, was the balance in order? This is something for us to judge. And I feel if that there is something basic which has tortured the bureaucracy and in return given it the bad name that we are getting today, it is largely because our ability to move fast with the new demands that were imposed upon the bureaucracy, it did not happen. Things moved at a faster pace than what actually happened. Though developmental activities got accelerated, the sudden transfer of vast volumes of money into the hands that had hitherto only been trusted with maintenance funds led to corruption on all fronts, political and administrative. There were very few stakeholders and organizations that didn't become a victim of this. A vicious circle was created, corruption eroded capability and credibility, and if this it wasn't bad enough, bureaucracy suffered another jolt as political interference grew. Would we like to recall the Durga Nagpal case of UP and the Ashok Khemka case of Haryana? Public sympathy was there in full. Media was supportive. But did the standpoint really get accepted? Nothing is known in the public domain of what really finally happened to the issues that were raised by these two officers. And don't we agree that this would have had a terrible effect in the two states where these instances happened? Open humiliation of officers in key positions is very common. Security of tenure has increasingly become another worry. It is very easy to say, how does it matter if you're transferred from Chhapra to Munger or from Munger to Ara? I belong to the Bihar cadre, and I can tell you with some past experience, it does matter. The family suffers, they get jolted, there is a public humiliation, and the morale of the officer breaks down systematically, and finally, in a way that the officer does not remain the same, and he simply wonders, why has he joined the Indian Administrative Service or the IPS or any service? Even though reforms are needed and bureaucracy undeniably needs to make a renewed effort to regain its lost confidence, they are still regarded as the chief architects of social change. Apart from the unifying factor between the various organs of the administrative machinery, the vital link between the rural and the urban, the state and the central government, the nation at large still looks up to it in any national calamity, be it flood, drought, law and order related troubles, relief, rehabilitation. It is not without reason that the highest ranking civil servant, that is the cabinet secretary, facilitates smooth transaction of business between ministries, departments that keeps the nation moving. Despite innumerable handicaps, it is difficult to imagine a better alternative to the bureaucratic machinery which the country possesses at present. If today we notice a vast transformation in the rural and urban sphere, and if myriads of Indians are excelling in innumerable ways, it is because of and not in spite of the governance provided by the Indian bureaucracy. Therefore, friends, let us try to improve it, reform it, not trash it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The interjections.
Sorry. Ready to run off.
That was an argument in favor of the bureaucrats, saying that don't blame the bureaucracy. Look at the changes going on in society. How can the bureaucrats remain immune from what is going on in society? 2 minutes of interjection starting now. Interjections?
Ma'am, is a bureaucrat trained to adapt, to foresee to changing situations? And if not, why is he not?
I remember in the time of late Shri Rajiv Gandhi, for the first time, there was a clear acceptance that the bureaucrats who were initially recruited are not equipped to handle the issues of the changing times. And I do recall that for the first time, we were sent out for reorientation programs. What I was trying to imply, that the pace at which changes were taking place in the country and the demands were so high that our capacity to adhere to the qualitative change and the pace of change, that the two did not match. And there is where we initially faltered, and that faltering did not stop there. The pace fastened and a capacity slowed, and therefore the imbalance was what was responsible for a large number of administrative lapses.
The inability to deal with fast change. Any more interventions? We have 1 more minute. Interjections? Anyone? Let me utilize the privilege of the chair. You mentioned the two examples of Durga Nagpal and Ashok Khemka. Would you say that nothing really came out of those initiatives? Because in the end, they did raise awareness and they did create a certain stimulus within the system. So aren't you being a little pessimistic about the two of them?
Madam Chairperson, what I meant to say is that in this state, a lot of bureaucrats were looking up at to what finally would be happening to especially the lady officer. They were looking up to the central government, they were looking up to the state government. I'm embarrassed to say because I was in the personal Ministry of Government of India myself. I'm afraid no real intervention took place even from the bureaucrats, because somewhere down the line, there was some invisible link or invisible hand moving in directions where the support did not come. Now, it may have raised public awareness and media did its role, but what did not really happen is that what bureaucrats would have liked to see out of this example, that they have come out clean, they have come out stronger, that, madam, did not happen. And there is where the backbone breaks.
Thank you very much. A very forceful argument, saying that the main reason why the bureaucrat is often blamed is because the bureaucrat simply doesn't keep pace with the fast-paced changes happening in society. Let me call upon the next team. Sri Ram College of Commerce. Speaking for the motion, Sharan Godia.
Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A pretty daunting forum to speak in. I've sat there and changed my speech 4 times around. But hopefully I'll get this one right. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to speak for the motion. This House believes that the Indian bureaucracy has failed in delivering good governance. So let me start off on a light note. Let me get my nerves free. So when I got this motion, ladies and gentlemen, the first thing I did was a simple Google search on the Indian bureaucracy or bureaucracy in India. And funnily, the most interesting thing I found, and you guys will find it very interesting too, the top 3 things on the related search item list, which was number 1, corruption in India, poor governance in India, and 3, failure of the bureaucracy. And I said, hey, what the hell? There is no debate here. The bureaucracy is being is synonymous with corruption, and the performance of the bureaucracy is being equated to poor governance. So this is a truistic motion. But having said that, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to point out to you through my speech why we have failed, and I'm a little disappointed that all speakers who spoke before me gave a very consequential approach to why we failed. I'm here to tell you that we were destined to fail. The system is a failure. Maybe the system was not made for independent India. So let me start off with the inherent flaws in the current system. I will prove to you how it's created a vicious circle and which was doomed to fail. So first point being the time-bound promotions within the bureaucratic system. So ladies and gentlemen, what is the time-bound promotion system? It means promotions within the bureaucratic system are basis age and experience and not merit and outcome. Ladies and gentlemen, if any system in the 21st century to follow this, we are bound to fail. There is no incentive for a person to work. He knows he's not going to get promoted. He's only going to get promoted when he completes X number of years or is X number of years old. So there is no motivation to work. As a result, he's very happy maintaining status quo, and nobody is going to question him. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what happens if we do question the person? If there's a new government, there's a new leader, and he wants to question his bureaucrats under him. What happens? Ladies and gentlemen, they are so unionized, no one's brought this out, they are so unionized that if they know they all can't get fired, right? So all that will happen is the next day, files will start going missing. Let me give you another example, a very relevant one and something which has been happening very recently. The new government announced a biometric attendance for central government employees in Delhi, only working in Delhi. So machines were installed in offices that was linked to their Aadhaar cards. People started logging in with their fingerprints. So attendance was recorded basis fingerprints. All was fine. Reports came out. People started entering office on time for a change. And then there was a series of incidents. All of a sudden, there were wires cut. There were machines broken. And there were machines missing, ladies and gentlemen, missing. So the funny thing here is people just do not want to work. They do not want to contribute. So in fact, in this case, a complaint has been lodged with the NIC on physical security of biometric attendance machines. And as a result, CCTV cameras have been installed in offices, all offices, is Krishi Bhavan, all of the offices in central Delhi. But even the CCTV cameras now have been covered with black cloths, red cloths. So this shows you the extent to which it is ingrained in the bureaucracy. They do not want to work. They are used to a system. They do not want the system to change. And they are very happy, comfortable there. Moving on to my next point, ladies and gentlemen, very important point here. The failure on the bureaucracy to attract top talent. This is a very, very key point. Now, if you ask a SRCC student or a Stephen student, yeah, even a Hindu student, I see a lot of looks from the crowd. Even a Hindu student now, does he want to join the bureaucracy? His answer more often than not will be no, or it will probably be the 4th or 5th choice for him. So this is not speaking too well of the system as a whole. They're not interested. They're happy in a comfortable job. So the guys who want a good job, who want to perform, will never be interested in moving into the system. Even if he does want to create a change, we've heard the story of the rotten apples, ladies and gentlemen. If there's one good apple in a basket of rotten apples, he is bound to get corrupted. So the system as a whole is a failure. So I'll just conclude by saying, yes, there's a lot of optimism in the air right now. And let's not get fooled by this optimism and what my opposition is going to say. He's going to play the blame game. But irrespective, I think I've proved on a fundamental level how the democracy, how the governance as a whole, and how the system as a whole is a failure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The voice of Gen Next, saying the entire bureaucracy is a colonial civil service not designed for independent India. It is bound to fail. Interjections of 2 minutes starting now. Yep.
Please go slow.
There are about 1 million students who want to join the bureaucracy and appear in the UPSC exams and the various state service exams. You mean to say that these young minds are not driven by the passion to serve the country, but they want to join the corrupt and the inefficient band of bureaucrats?
Thank you for your question, sir. I take your argument that 1 million people are willing to, wanting to join the bureaucracy, but 1 million in a percentage of how many? How many students are there today? How many quality students are there today? This percentage has reduced significantly. And 1 million is a shocking number. I was expecting it to be much more. So if that is the case, I think you have your answer.
I'm a little confused because you've used some amusing anecdotes about CCTV cameras to make large sweeping statements like, this shows the bureaucrat doesn't want to work. I would like you to actually give us some empirical evidence to demonstrate they failed in delivering good governance and not just say that SRCC graduates don't want to become IAS officers.
Thank you, ma'am. I could go on and on giving you so many examples. I think a lot of speakers have given you a consequential approach, result to why the governance failed, why the bureaucracy has failed. You only have to look at your headlines in all leading newspapers and all leading news channels. They'll tell you about the scams, the corruption, bribery allegations, the policy paralysis, the archaic laws, retrospective taxation, and so on and so forth. All of this has happened because of it's a failure on the part of the bureaucracy.
May I ask, is there time? You're a very good neighbor, so the question is simple. All the things that you just listed, do you rest them at the threshold of the bureaucracy only?
Thank you for your question, sir. I do agree with you that they are not only to blame. What is
the proposition, sir, that you are defending?
No. What I'm telling you is they have failed immensely. They are not alone. As everybody else has pointed out, they are hand in glove with the political system, and as a result of which they have failed. But the debate here is not if bureaucracy and politicians have failed. The debate here is about, has the bureaucracy failed? And yes, they have failed too.
Thank you very much. We're going to have to move on to the next speaker. We now have Pranay Berry speaking against the motion.
Should I start? I've got a count somewhere in the crowd. I think, yeah, I have a count. Okay, great. Should I start? Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. To truly understand where this debate goes, for or against, I think we need to answer two fundamental questions, and I'll lay them out right at the outset, and then we'll go into the debate and see where this debate actually went, right? So question one, have we really failed in delivering good governance? And we'll delve into that. And question two, This debate isn't about who's failed in delivering good governance or who is the only person who's failed in delivering good governance. We're saying that if there has been a failure in good governance, what is the single biggest factor or the single biggest organization in contributing to that failure? And that is where I will say that it is not the bureaucracy. But first, let's start with, has there really been a failure in good governance, right? Let's look at this in an outcome-oriented manner, right? So the standard argument is, and we hear a lot of this was India, this was China, and look where China went, and look where India went. China is one of the fastest growing economic countries in the world, and we were second, third, or fourth behind them, right? That's not failure. That's just being second, third, or fourth, right? And you look at China, and China is not even a democracy. We place so much value on our democratic principles and being a pluralistic democracy, and that's got to count for something at the end of the day, right? You look at your socio-economic indicators moving up again and again and again. We sent a fantastic space mission to Mars. We've got the possibility, and Mr. Modi's spoken about this so often, the possibility to be servicing the needs, the skill needs of the world 10 years from now. At the threshold of all of this, when you consider that we've had 65 years of independence, before that have been leached for centuries, and many, many centuries, leached, colonized, and absolutely robbed and used as a feeder nation for so many other nations in the world, have we really failed? My answer is probably no. We've probably done a good job, right? There have been failures, but it's not a failure in absolute, right? But even for those failures, the few failures that there have been, the question is who is responsible or who is the single largest contributor to a potential partial failure, right? And let's look at the first real argument I have here, which is about policy paralysis, right? If we were in this room 5 years ago, this motion would have probably read, will India overtake China in 2030, right? In 5 years, the entire motion has suddenly changed to, has India failed in delivering good governance? The bureaucracy has been constant over the last 60 years, but what's really changed in the 5-7 years for us to be discussing such a pessimistic motion today? The idea is the failure of UPA2, and what was so characteristic of UPA2 was a complete policy paralysis. People didn't go to parliament, there was no attendance in parliament, we had a record low in terms of bills passed. It was a complete systemic failure of your political class, right? And when your tone has changed in 5-7 years, from such an optimistic tone to such a pessimistic tone, with the only real differentiating factor being the failure of your policymakers and corruption at your policymaker level, it's very clear that the blame has to be apportioned in almost majority to your political class, right? Now let's look at the second aspect, which is that, and it's something that a lot of people here have spoken about, that largely your bureaucracy cannot and probably will never, in its current system, be the single largest factor contributing to a success or a failure, okay? So let's look at how the Indian system is largely top-down, okay? With Accenture, I was working with certain governments and certain state governments with skill development. And we went to these people and we were talking about setting up a world-class skill development institute. And we said, you know, we're going to get German best practices and Japanese best practices and this and that. And they said, sir, ye sab theek hai. Aap ek cheez report mein likhiye, that we will not have politicians, their cronies, their political influences, or any of those people getting access into these skill development centers. We do not want any influence from your politicians. We do not want people infiltrating, and we do not want the people who are training to be people who are getting political favors to be there, right? The idea is, your politician says, meko skill development karni hai. I want to train 500 million people by 2022. The bureaucrat then implements it, and then the politician exploits that for personal benefit. How can you blame the bureaucrat for a failure in the implementation of a project when the politician is controlling it? It's such a top-down effect that really it can't count for much. The second aspect is a top-down vision. It's not always negative. You look at things like the Modi government. When the Modi government came to power, the first thing everybody said was, wow, look, the bureaucracy is going to work on time. It's fantastic. The government's actually working late. The government's working on Sundays. The fact that the bureaucracy going on time is not newsmaking or should not be newsmaking, but the idea basically is this, that with the bureaucracy being constant, a political motivation coming from the top can shape which way the bureaucracy is going, or which way we think change can be effected and which way governance can work. So what I'm saying is that the bureaucracy is not or will never be the single major force to take this government forward, or to take this country forward, or to take this country forward, or to take this country backward. So if anybody on this side, on the other side of the house said we failed, it's very clear that that failure has to be largely blamed on the political class. I'll conclude with an anecdote from my own life. And as an SRCC student, I think Sharan delved a lot into this. The bulk of your students did not look at the bureaucracy as a prime example of where we wanted to go. It just didn't look like a place we could make enough of a difference. The pay was never great anyway. It didn't look like a place where we could really contribute, right? The idea was very simple. If you could free up your bureaucracy, make it an independent organization, and it could even do 20% of the work that it could with that large funding, without political influence, it would be a great organization. We need to remove the political class from this, and the bureaucracy would actually be a merit-based, talent-based, highly qualified organization to deliver great governance in this country. With that, I'm very, very proud to boast.
Thank you very much. If there's anyone to blame, blame the politician, the politician, the politician, not the bureaucrat. Intervention starting now. Yep.
Mr. Speaker, your central argument seemed to be that if you take away the political class, everything is hunky-dory. Where does the political class come from?
No, so the idea is this, right? Your bureaucracy comes from a very stringent process. You have a very merit-based process that goes into this. Your politicians, and as much as we'd like to say they're representatives of the people and it's the people who choose these, I'd like to ask everybody in this room, how many of you are happy with the politicians we voted in? I voted for a politician because I wanted the BJP to come to power, but I mean, 5 days later, somebody told me he was a rapist. It's a disappointing situation, but we vote for what we have. It's not necessarily representative of what is the best out there. Whereas your bureaucracy, if it's a merit-based organization, might actually be a far better organization to take decisions.
So it's the political rot which is really responsible for the bureaucratic failure. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so you mentioned at the very beginning of your speech that there have been several failures. However, they have not been significant enough to contribute to the actual failure. So can you, first of all, give a couple of examples of these failures which have not, in effect, contributed to the failure of the system? And
No,
secondly, aren't you being evasive when you say that there are some failures, but then we don't know who to pin it on because the bureaucracy is not really responsible?
No. Okay, so there are two parts to your question. Firstly, have we failed? All I'm saying is that in the context of India, where it's a 60-year-old independent nation, in the context of the history that came before that and how we'd been used as a feeder nation, leached and colonized and ruled by people who weren't necessarily looking after our best interests, today where we are is probably a very, very positive situation. It could be a lot better. There's no way I'm denying that. And in fact, most things in the world could be a lot better. And there are failures that have contributed to us being from X plus 100 to X plus 90. That 10 is a failure. There can be multiple examples. The fact that I need to pay someone to get a license faster is a very simple example of how the government sometimes has let me down. Now, there's no denying that, right? Your second aspect of how I'm shying away from who to apportion blame to is not true. All through my speech, and Sagrika said it again, the blame is politicians, politicians, and politicians. It was fairly clear that the blame is exclusively on the political class in this. It's not on the bureaucracy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our last team for this evening's debate, last but by no means the least, Lady, I beg your pardon, Miranda House, and speaking for the motion, Swara Bhaskar.
My fear was I would have to go first, so I went to the bathroom early and now I have to go again, so I might be speaking fast. Don't time that. No, I'm not. Okay. Do you have your own clock? No, but my father is somewhere. He's going to wave. Recently at a family dinner time gossip session, which I love, we were gossiping and discussing the marriage of a relative's daughter who'd made a very prized catch, an IAS groom. Turns out that the going dowry rate for an upper caste, mind you, IAS or IPS officer in Bihar these days is about 40 to 50 lakhs in cash, inclusive of jewelry, but not including a car, a house, and the other expenses that marriages entail, like barat ka kharcha, patakon ka kharcha, gaadi ka kharcha, and whatever other kharcha the boy's side can imagine. As an excitable grandmother put it, IAS ke liye dahej ka to kuchho limit nahi hai bhai. This little family secret, embarrassing family secret of ours, to me, points to a very central paradox in the relationship between the Indian bureaucracy and good governance. I will not test your intelligence by reminding you that dowry ka adan pradan is prohibited and punishable by Indian law, but I will only point out to you that it is one of the many responsibilities of the bureaucracy to bring to book those who engage in this activity. And yet, It would in fact be the most intimate relations of the bureaucrat, his smug parents, his proud in-laws, his blushing bride, and indeed himself that he would have to charge were he in fact engaged in the business of good governance. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed judges, honorable chair, my worthy opponents, and everyone who is so patient today, of course the Indian bureaucracy has failed in delivering good governance, and miserably so. My contention, however, is that the Indian bureaucracy has failed in delivering good governance, not only because there is corruption in it, inefficiency, lack of drive, non-performance, red tapeism, status quoism, lack of results or discrimination, apathy, arbitrariness, ineptitude that characterize the bureaucratic procedure in India. All the above are true. So much so that it's obvious, I have it by heart, and that studies show that in rural India, people actually budget the bribe that they will have to pay to the patwari that month as part of monthly expenses. My contention is that the real and utter failure of the Indian bureaucracy lies in the deep contradiction, the conflict, and even opposition between the values upon which this bureaucracy was founded and the values, ideals, beliefs, and principles that the men and women who administer this mammoth structure hold dear to their heart, right from the cabinet secretary on the top down to the patwari that Arunaji reminded us about. I'm an actor. Allow me another anecdote, please. An early childhood trip to Ayodhya with the extended family. We stood at the disputed site and stared at the controversial structure, now a mosque, originally apparently a temple, in legend and belief, the holy birthplace of one of our gods. At this moment in my story, being manned by an indifferent and, bored-looking, khaki-clad policeman. A robust and, I have to say it, overbearing aunt walked up to this man. She was herself the daughter of a police officer, and went up to him and in a challenging tone said, "Kaun jaat ke ho?" "Thakur hai," he replied with surprise and assertion. "Saram nahi aati?" the unputdownable aunt retorted. Sri Ramchandra bhi Thakur the. ठाकुर हो तुम और यहाँ खड़े होकर ये मस्जिद की रक्षा कर रहे हो. The policeman paused and then replied with a wry smile. बहन जी नौकरी कर रहे हैं, पर आप उठाइए ईंटा पत्थर और दे मारिए, जो हम रोक दिए सो हम ठाकुर नहीं. When such is the failure of its officials to recognize and owe allegiance to the values upon which this bureaucracy was founded, is it surprising that the police and administration turn a blind eye as riots unfold in their areas, that they excuse or are complicit in crimes against women, that Indian bureaucratic decisions can be influenced by top corporates but never by resistance movements of slum dwellers, when the officials of the bureaucracy largely espouse values that are residually colonial, feudal, classist, casteist, and elitist, it is no surprise that the Indian bureaucracy remains a slave of power and capital and thus fails at delivering good governance. The arguments that my worthy opponents have made reek of the central reason why the Indian bureaucracy has in fact failed at governance in general. My esteemed opponents cited UN development reports, millennium reports, GDPs, numbers, astounding numbers. China, the more poetic one, cited Mir. Barring Arunaji, who mentioned in passing, no one talked about the 120 crore people that this governance is intended for. That person has remained absent from this debate. Allow me to focus attention on that person. I wager that every single person in this room, including all the bureaucrats here, have at least one story of the encounter with the Indian system, the corrupt, murky Babu. This person makes us largely English-speaking, educated, urban, prosperous people, very frustrated. Imagine when we feel so frustrated with the system, what the tribal in Bastar, the Muslim in Kashmir, a member of the ethnic minority in the Northeast sees when he looks at the bureaucracy or the state apparatus, a government that appears predatory, even venal, an administration that is non-representative and exclusivist, and security forces working under Babus who are often brutal. If the alienation of the citizens from the state in so many corners of this country is not a testament to the failure of the Indian bureaucracy, I don't know what is. My opponents can make any number of arguments, but let's face it, that the lived and experienced reality of the bureaucracy proves that the Indian bureaucracy has failed. I think the House is being generous when they say good governance. It has failed in governance per se. And so I rest my case, and tomorrow morning I have to go and apply for a passport renewal. As they say, you can love or hate the bureaucracy, but you cannot escape it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was a very hard-hitting statement on why the bureaucracy has failed. When bureaucrats themselves take dowry, then how can we not assume that the bureaucracy has not failed? Interventions for 2 minutes, starting now.
You spoke about the numbers that this side of the house had mentioned, and a lot of those numbers actually had to do with the high development indicators in terms of literacy, in terms of education, in terms of all of those things, inclusive growth that India has also, over the last 70 years, done very well in. So can you please explain your point about how this was not about the 1.2 billion people and about a certain class?
My point is simply that, in my opinion, governance has to be judged by the lived experience of those that are governed, not by statistics and numbers that are printed in reports. If I have seen or experienced a certain reality in my dealings with the state, I will obviously believe that, as opposed to some UN development report or any other millennium goal that is written by however credible a scholar. I think that a lived reality will always be more real and more, it will be truer in your experience. That's all I meant.
Any other interventions? May I utilize the privilege of the chair? When you say that the bureaucracy is entitled, elitist, casteist, are these attitudes that were there perhaps with bureaucrats 2 decades ago? Now, many would say that the bureaucrats come from a strata of society where, in fact, they are agents of change because they come from a strata of society which is not elitist, which is not necessarily casteist, and the democratization of the bureaucracy in India has been one of its great successes.
I said largely, and I think that it's important to remind ourselves, as Aruna ji did, that when we speak of the bureaucracy, we're not speaking only of the sophisticated cabinet secretaries and the enlightened people who are present all through all the rungs of the bureaucracy. We're also speaking of the patwari. We're also speaking of that postman who had no shame to, steal from old people. So I think that the problem is that largely in India, and it's not just the bureaucracy is made up of the people. We are still largely a feudal country. This is the truth. Our values are still largely feudal, and the bureaucracy only reflects that.
Thank you very much. Very punchy and hard-hitting arguments. I now call upon our very last speaker, last but not the least, from Miranda House, Zura Chatterjee, to speak against the motion.
Madam Chairman, pardon? Your time, please. Madam Chairman, members of the House, esteemed judges, my worthy opponents, it is my hapless fate to speak last. It is also an advantage because everything has already been said, and I can maybe sum it up all very fast. I can say, ladies and gentlemen, on the basis of my 35 years of long experience in the bureaucracy, that the bureaucracy has not failed in delivering good governance. I say this on the basis of the gratitude of people who have come to me, thanked me for what I have done for them. I can say for myself, I do not feel I have been a failure. And I do not feel that hundreds of my colleagues who toil day in and day out to keep this country together, to deliver good governance to the people, right down from the cabinet secretary to the patwari, have all failed in giving good governance. It is just not true, Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, when the Indian bureaucracy conducts the world's most complex management exercise, the great Indian elections, it delivers not just good, but outstanding governance. When the Indian bureaucracy organizes a Mahakumbh, the largest religious gathering on earth of 120 million people, it delivers not just good, but brilliant governance. It attracts a group of 50 Harvard researchers to come and study how these pop-up mega cities come up. When a Hemant Karkare answers the call of duty, faces bullets, and lays down his life for maintaining law and order, it would be shoddy of us to call it bad governance. Ladies and gentlemen, when disaster or calamity strikes, it is the bureaucracy which rushes to provide relief and succor. When Indian citizens are trapped in war-torn zones, it is the Indian bureaucracy which smoothly conducts Operation Safe Homecoming. India's green revolution, improvement of social indices, all the figures which my colleagues and friends have mentioned, these didn't happen on their own. They happened with the due diligence, with the efforts of the bureaucracy at the grassroots. There could be an endless list of achievements, but the honorable members of the opposition would no doubt like to undermine and gloss over them. And so I would most humbly urge this august House to throw this proposition out of the House without a second thought, as it seeks to make a sweeping generalization which condemns the entire bureaucracy in one fell stroke and pronounces it a failure, despite innumerable well-documented examples of best practices and governance by the Indian bureaucracy. However, Madam Chairman, out of deference and respect for the pains taken by my worthy opponents to support the proposition, I will give it a second thought. I will break it into segments and look at it from every possible angle, and I will prove to this worthy House that any way you look at it, the proposition must and always fails. But before I do this, let me respond to the examples of bad governance, corruption, scams, on which the worthy members of the opposition seem to be basing their defense. Madam Chairman, in the bureaucracy, as in other organizations, there are always the black sheep. I do not wish to defend the indefensible, and I will concede that there are bad examples too. However, in a huge bureaucracy, such as the Indian bureaucracy, innumerable examples of good governance also go unnoticed or taken for granted, whereas the bad, the shocking, the ugly is hyped to give an impression of failure and always failure. But I would like to repeat and assert before this House that the bureaucracy has time and again come up with extraordinary performance in emergent situations, and therefore the sweeping generalization which the proposition seeks to make cannot be supported. Let us go to a microscopic scrutiny. Let's look at it from any angle. Has the bureaucracy failed as a system? No, it is not. It is working and well. It is a parliamentary democracy system which we have here in India. It is a system in which the political masters, the bureaucracy, and the public are equal participants. It cannot be ascribed to the bureaucracy alone that it has failed. Whether it is actually a lack of good governance, this is another factor to be seen. What is good governance? Good, bad, better, worse, excellent, all subjective terms. How do we rate this? Fortunately, I could find something called a Fragile States Index, where a group of a think tank has rated countries, and India, along with China, comes somewhere in the middle. We do not have bad governance in this country. It is not Somalia or South Sudan. It is not a failed state. It is a country where governance exists, and it is, I believe, Madam Chairman, good governance. I will conclude by saying it is crystal clear that the proposition fails ab initio in the macro view because it is a very sweeping statement. It can never be the case that the entire Indian bureaucracy has at all times failed to deliver good governance. In the microscopic view also, we have proved that the Indian bureaucracy is ever evolving and absorbing new concepts of management of e-governance, has not failed, but repeatedly delivered excellent, brilliant, and outstanding governance, including the world's most complex management exercise and the largest religious gathering on earth. Thank you
Thank you very
Madam Chair.
much. Very forceful and wise arguments saying that any bureaucracy that organizes the great Indian election, that organizes the Mahakumbh, how can this possibly be a failure? 2 minutes of interjections starting now. Okay, interjections.
Thank you.
You mentioned about how the bureaucracy has stepped in, especially when there arises a situation of disaster. But most of the allegations against the bureaucracy happen to be that they were not prepared for that disaster, or the disaster in effect could have been averted. And in that context, don't you think the bureaucracy has failed? Even taking the example of the J&K floods, wherein the entire disaster could have been averted. So instead of lauding the effort post-disaster, wouldn't you say that no efforts pre-disaster is actually the failure of the bureaucracy?
It is unfortunate that disasters are not in the control of the bureaucracy, but I will read to you just a few words from one of my colleagues, which will answer your question very well. It is sad that life sometimes gives you the test before you have had time to study the lesson. Keeping our composure when everything around us was in shambles, we strove to find simplicity out of clutter, harmony out of discord, and opportunities in the midst of difficulties. Driven by the helpless faces and expecting eyes, we gathered all our strength and did our best to bring smiles back on their faces. It was not possible for us to give the children back the nurturing lap of the mother, but we did our best to ensure that spring returns to them with the hope and promise of a secure and brighter future. Ladies and gentlemen, the bureaucracy always tries to do its best. We may not be able to deliver to perfection, but we try our best.
We have time for one more interjection.
Madam, you regretted the fact that natural disasters weren't within the control of the bureaucracy.
Absolute control.
Is it the philosophy of the bureaucracy to exercise control, or in your words, absolute control?
It is not the philosophy to exercise absolute control, I would say, but it is a nature of bureaucracy itself. If we are using the word bureaucracy, it defines hierarchies, it defines regulation, control, rule-bound, etc., etc.
Thank you very much. An informed and wise intervention on the successes of the bureaucracy so far. This concludes our debate. All the teams have now spoken. The judges, I believe, will now make up their minds. We're now going to turn it over to a 5-minute, just 5 minutes, question-answer session with the audience. Hang on a second, I'm going to have to put on this stopwatch. Right. Yeah. Go ahead, madam. Yeah, you had a question? You have to indicate to who you want to ask the question to.
Are the leftovers from the university who take the exam. Let me remind him that the best go to the IITs, engineering colleges, and medical colleges. The leftovers come to the university. Well, if you go to the academy, you see 45 to 50% of the IAS officers are either engineers or doctors.
Thank you for your question, ma'am. I never said leftovers from universities. I said the top students, it's not on their priority getting into the bureaucracy. It's probably 4th or 5th on the agenda. And like you pointed out, IITs, I don't know if IITs and medical students are relevant to this debate. We only make career choices once we're in college and once we choose a stream. After you're in engineering, after you're in medicine, very seldom, very
Go ahead, ma'am.
very seldom do you choose.
Ma'am, I have a question here.
Okay.
Since
go ahead.
the speaker just now mentioned about the medical profession, I am Dr. Asif Ahmed. I am a psychiatrist. And we have been talking about two classes of people, the politicians and the bureaucrats. I just would like to introduce a third class, the judiciary. There is a school of thought that in a democratic hierarchy, one of the three classes will gain ascendancy perpetually. It will be either in turns, it will happen. Now, my question is to anybody from the esteemed speakers or the luminaries here, like Mr. Bhasin and Mr. K.C. Mehra. Is it because of an adversarial attitude that this happens? And my second question is it good for the country or bad for the country? Anybody for that? Thank you.
Mr. Verma, would you like to take that? Is there an adversarial relationship developing all the time between judiciary and the bureaucracy?
I would say that very often they are in conflict, but it's not an ideal situation. And certainly in India, there is a certain preeminence very often, rightly or wrongly, to one of these three institutions in situations where inevitably only the bureaucracy gets blamed. That is a factor that we must take into account.
Right. Yes, the lady there in the white. Yeah, I think, can we get the mic to her? There's a mic floating around somewhere.
If they stop becoming litmus paper, the governance will improve, firstly. And secondly, are you really optimistic that bureaucrats will stop becoming litmus papers?
I gave a metaphor that very often, I was not talking about paper, I was talking about bureaucrats. It was a metaphor that very often bureaucrats and their ability, effectiveness and performance is influenced by the kind of political leadership which is in place. The same bureaucrat who is otherwise slothful, hardly attends office and is ineffective, with a change in political leadership, clearly defined priorities, identified goals, begins to perform, and that performance is verifiable and visible. I have seen it happen, and therefore I cited it.
Does that work for you? You're shaking your head. Right. Right.
May
okay.
I just
We're gonna
add
have
to that?
Yeah.
What she says is quite not to be, let's leave the litmus paper alone. It's amazing that within a month, a civil servant or a class of civil servants or bureaucrats or technocrats who advocate a certain kind of policy or a certain kind of program change to what is completely the opposite. And it is very shocking. So I think what she perhaps says is that they cannot change with the political bosses. They have to be tethered to some norms, some values, some basis. That's where we speak of constitutional values. And therefore, they must bring the political bosses to accept that there can be changes through the vote, but you cannot change the quality of government and governance completely.
So there's no, in that sense, there's no permanent civil service in that sense, but a changeable civil service. Yeah, the gentleman then. Yeah, yeah.
Here, my question is addressed to anyone who will take it there. The very issue that we are discussing, when we talk about the bureaucrats failing us in governance, my question, my statement here, with which what I start here is, don't we all think that it's first of all we failed ourselves? It's not the politician who's failed us, or it's not the bureaucrat who's failed us. I suppose the first thing that we should introspect is that have we failed ourselves? Why has the situation come when?
Sir, because we're running against time.
Okay. So my question here is, how many of us are there to contribute towards this change in system where we'll have more answerable politicians and bureaucrats for
Right, so
us?
this is, in a sense, a rhetorical question, and it's well taken that we all need to look inward and ask how many of us are willing to change. Lady over there, last questions now, we're up against time. Yeah.
Vanita Shastri, and I'll address it to anybody. I just want to know what constitutes good governance in a society where when a politician is actually, like Jayalalitha, taken charge of and put in prison and asked for being accountable, the community, the society, the public actually puts dharna and asks for it to be reversed.
I think it's a debate, and therefore there have been these categories. And I really don't like to be in debates. But I'm just come for the fun of it, and I've come here. But really, these issues cannot be divided into pro and con. Most of them are in gray. And if in the case of Jayalalitha, whatever's happened to her and whatever's been a fallout is perhaps the poor don't react so much to her corruption as to the midday meals that she provided, the food that she made available very cheap, the structure that functioned very well, the delivery. Tamil Nadu has the best midday meal program in the country. It also has very good delivery services and subsidies for various things that she made possible. The people on the streets are reacting to that. Probably they also condemn her corruption, but immediately probably they see that. And I don't think that it is right or wrong, but I'm explaining what could be a reason for those street protests for what has happened to Jayalalitha.
Last question, we're running against time, yeah.
The proposition really has been whether Indian bureaucracy is a steel frame or the steel frame, S-T-E-A-L or S-T-E-E-L. So, whilst it is while that may be an absolute way of looking at the issue, don't you think, and that's to any one of the eminent speakers here, that governance is a service which is predicated on the level of economic and social development or the polity in the country. It's not an absolute thing. So given the level of development that India, and if we look at it in a historical context, would any one of you say that the governance is poor? Or like an emerging economy, governance is emerging and evolving? And that's the question. Thank you.
I couldn't agree with you more, Sanjeev, that in a dynamic situation, governance would also be viewed from various angles. But I think at the end of the day, when we talk about governance, we talk in terms of the aspirations of the people. And are we able, given our resources, are we meeting those aspirations? Are we working in their interest? I don't know, you were not here, but some of us were speaking. We talked of certain health indices where India lags behind even Nepal and Bangladesh. There are other stupendous achievements that the bureaucracy has done. But the balance of it is what? Are we meeting the aspirations of the common Indian, or are we entrenching privilege and entitlement? Now, this is a debate, as Aruna says, the pros and cons. My firm view, I've spent, almost 2 decades in the bureaucracy and now almost 2 decades in the private sector. I know I don't look that old, but there are no absolute answers, Sanjeev. You raised a very fundamental issue. If you're looking for a catch-all one answer, it doesn't exist. If social criteria in terms of human development index is important to you, governance is miserable in this country. If you look at the phenomenal achievement which the bureaucracy does, and many speakers pointed out, organizing the world's largest election, it's a stupendous achievement. But somewhere in between, there are the aspirations of the people, how well are we meeting them? I mean, your answer is as good as mine. I'm pretty convinced that in critical areas. Sure.
Permit me to just give a slightly different version. I think the whole tenor of the discussions appears to give an impression that it is really clearly dispensable considering the flavor that is being attached. I personally feel that we all agree that it is a relative concept. Changing time, changing expectations, rising populations and needs, we have not been able to match up. You see, there's a sudden spurt of expectations of the common man. And bureaucrats are expected to cater to each and every resource, no resource, training, no. So I think that while judging the failure or success, why don't we keep this in mind? I think this is something very important before you rush to a conclusion about his failure. Thank you.
I think that brings us to the end of our question-answer session. I know the lady there is very, very keen. Go ahead. Can we have a mic?
Thanks, Agrika. I'm Swati Sharma, Additional Secretary to the Lieutenant Governor. My simple question to Mr. Pradeep Puri would be, don't you think that it is the faceless, the nameless bureaucrat who works in remote places, the Naxalite-prone areas of Chhattisgarh and Maharashtra, the remote areas, tough terrain, inclement weather areas in Arunachal Pradesh and Northeast, who provide the basic services to the grassroots level, the people who do not have the access to the basic resources which they are destined to have? Thanks.
Madam, I completely agree with you and any loyal and proud Indian would at the stupendous sacrifices which are made by some of our bureaucrats working in those remote areas under phenomenal threats. But madam, why do some of these problems exist in the first place? What is the teacher to pupil ratio in some of the Naxalite areas? We have the Home Secretary sitting here smiling at me. But seriously, what is the doctor attendance in PHCs at some of these so-called marginalized areas? It is governance at stake. I am not doubting the caliber of the bureaucracy. I will never do that. I was a proud member of the bureaucracy. But the fact that the problem exists is symptomatic of the quality of governance which exists in these areas.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of our question-answer session with the audience. I think none of us envy the judges because all the speakers were so passionate, so incisive, so insightful, and presented such forceful arguments that it's in fact going to be very difficult to decide which among them can be ranked as number one or number two, or which team can be ranked, because they really were also very captivating and stimulating. I think we've had a lot of food for thought today. We've had lots of provocative opinion, lots of rebuttals. Let's give a big hand to all our participants. And thank you very much to all of you. We will now await the decision of the judges. Oh, I beg your pardon. We now place the motion to the vote. The motion, remember, this House believes the Indian bureaucracy has failed in delivering good governance. We are going to do this by a show of hands, I understand? Right. So let's have a show of hands. This House believes the Indian bureaucracy has failed in delivering good governance. How many of you say yes? Yay. How many say nay? Nay. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The Indian bureaucracy has failed to deliver good governance. Thank you very much indeed to all of you. And we now await the next leg of the program.
Thank you very much, Sagarika, for conducting an excellent debate. Big hand for her. May I now invite Dr. Pratibha Jolly, the principal of Miranda House, to say a few words on behalf of the participating colleges.
One of the participants, Arunaji, said, teachers are part of the bureaucracy and they have failed. I was one of the naysayers. Going by the debate and what we heard today, no one can say that Delhi University and its colleges and the teachers therein failed the nation. It's such a pleasure today, ladies and gentlemen, to be here and speak on behalf of 6 of the colleges. There are many others out there, 79 to be precise, but St. Stephen's and Hindu got tired of having this immense rivalry, and across the road they wanted then other people to come in, and of course they had to look at the brilliant women's institutions. So SRCC, the top college of the country for maybe 2 decades, also had to be brought in. But it says about the changing times that today, although we have 5 brilliant women debaters amongst us, but also 3 all-women institutions, the changing times are telling us that the women have arrived, and the University of Delhi is extremely proud of all its colleges, the other colleges being co-ed. Next time, I hope, will certainly also bring in women debaters. It is a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, also to thank Lalit Bhasin, the Old Student Association of Hindu College, Kavita and Ravi Burman, who have actually motivated us to look at our alumni networks all over again. And the last 3 weeks, as we have assisted them in putting together this wonderful, eclectic, distinguished gathering, have been very meaningful for us. I've particularly enjoyed linking again with our alumni of coming from diverse fields. All of them have done us proud, and it's not just for one college, but as I look around the hall, you know, it is the who's who list of the country, almost. And I say almost because many had to be left out. They come from diverse disciplines and in areas of work, but also I must say it has been wonderful that the 5 Millennium graduates have done us proud today. That said, the ageless alumni and alumni of, never wither, they're always bright, brilliant, and articulate, tell us this is exactly where we're headed. So it's been a pleasure, and I've really enjoyed this, but thank you also to the organizers for giving us this great opportunity to link up with the alumni and alumni. This is just the way to go forward, but we are certainly transforming the country, and I think not just the best university, but also the colleges of the country are raring to go forward as they are changing aspirations and transformative changes coming about. So thank you all. It's been a proud, proud day for all of us, and I'm sure all colleges feel the same way, because all of this distinguished gathering belongs to all of us, and it's been a pleasure being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jolly. May I now request our chief guest, Mr. Anil Goswami, who is also an alumnus, to say a few words. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, after having been trashed and told that the tribe I belong to has failed in governance, I really don't think there's much to say in the matter, is it? I was unfortunately not in time because I was held up somewhere, so I couldn't hear everyone. But whatever I heard was absolutely brilliant. The cut and the thrust, the repartees, the interjections, it was very enjoyable. I'll just make a brief statement. Bureaucrats, for whatever they are worth, they work very hard. That cloth on the the cloth on the cameras and the breaking of the machines happens, yes, not everywhere. And we repair them very quickly and we remove the cloth very quickly. It is a fact that our country probably could have been much further up the ladder. But it is also a fact that if people hadn't worked very hard, we wouldn't have reached where we have. So, on balance, yes, there is scope for improvement, but it's not all very sorry state of affairs. We can improve, we are improving, and with the change in the character of the bureaucracy, because it is becoming more inclusive now, if you look at the results of the holiday services, you will find that people from all sections of society are making it. Some people say it is not the first choice any longer, possibly. But then I can't account for the fact that why is it that people who are alumni of IITs, of the best medical colleges, of the best colleges in the country, why would they leave everything and want to appear for the IS examination and get into the civil services? Everything has to be looked at in balance. And on balance, what I would say is, well, we are still attracting very good talent, and we are attracting talent of and from the places where we did not reach earlier. Today, we are getting people into the services from every section of society, people who have been through hardship, people who have been nurtured in luxury. You have this entire cross-section. So when these young people look at a problem, the perspective is far superior to what it was when we joined service. So I am a great optimist, and I think that the bureaucracy is working hard. It is trying to transform. Yes, maybe the pace is not as rapid as it ought to be, but it will get there by and by. And let me assure you that this country has no reason to be pessimistic. Yes, as my friend said, that the indices for health are poor, indices for education are poor, people do not go to perform duty in difficult areas. Yes. I'll just give you one illustration of what I'm trying to say. One of my colleagues told me once that she went to China, and they took her to some school which was about 4 hours drive away from Beijing. And this lady happened to be the Secretary of Education of the state she was working in. So while she was there, she asked the Chinese, what is the percentage of absenteeism amongst your teachers in this country? So the host couldn't understand the question. They asked her, she thought that the interpreter had not been able to explain it properly. So she repeated the question. If there are 200 teachers in your school, on a given day, how many are absent? And how many of them are absent continuously? So the host was offended. She says, no, but why should they be absent? He said, no, I'm just asking. She said, no, but don't we pay them? So she says, yes, you pay them, but in spite of that, how many are absent? So she says, nobody will be absent. And she said, if somebody decides to be absent deliberately, what do you do? So they said, we have this parent-teacher association and we have the party infrastructure here. So then we will have a meeting and we will decide what to do. And she said, what will you do? He says, the punishment can go up to shooting her dead or him dead. No, I'm not joking. I'm not joking. What I'm trying to say is that when we compare ourselves to another country which has another system, you have to understand, in my country, shoot anybody, you can't even stop his salary. I mean, he'll go and get some order from somewhere or get a telephone call from somewhere and you'll have to pay the salary. So when you look at it, you have to understand that we have accepted this system. It is a wonderful system. I think this country can only be run by the system we are running through. Because unless we have this system of valves to take out the pressure, this whole place would have exploded. So we have a wonderful system. We need this system. The only thing is we need to work it a little better. Thank you very much.
Please come back, the chief guest and Dr. Bhasin. Dr. Kavita Sharma will announce the results.
Thank you. The moment that we are waiting for. I'd first like you, ladies and gentlemen, all to give a big hand to all the speakers. I'm sure you will agree that it has been a brilliant evening. Now for the result. The best speaker goes to Mrs. Aruna Roy. Could I request Mr. Goswami and Dr. Bhasin, please come up. Please come up. Now for the best team. The best team goes to Sri Ram College of Commerce. Thank you. So now you know that the judges have actually done a very good job of it. I'd like to thank Justice Leela Seth, Dr. Devki Jain, and Justice Mukul Mudgal. Thank you very much. Now, Ravi, can you take over, please?
minutes more. We'd like to present mementos to all the speakers. So please.
I would like to invite my very dear friend, Mr. K.C. Mehra, the Senior Vice President of OSA, to join us.
Speaker. I'll go in the order they are seated. Yashovardhan Azad. Mr. Pradeep Puri. Zora Chatterjee. Swara Bhaskar. Swara, I thought I'll just tell you were talking about your passport. The chief passport officer is sitting here. Nabila Jamshed. Chanan Parwani. And our winning team, Pranay Berry and Sharan Godia. Pawan Verma and Swapan Das Gupta. And Mrs. Krishna Singh and Aruna Roy. We'd also like to present mementos to the participating college principal, Dr. Babli Sensara from IP College. Sorry, Dr. Babli Moitra Saraf. Dr. Pratibha Jolly. Professor Abhay Kumar. Dr. Preeti Dhawan from LSR College. Dr. Pradyuman Kumar from Hindu College. Reverend Thampu from Stephens is not here. Can we ask somebody to accept the memento on his behalf? Anyone from Stephens? We will send it to him. May I now request Mr. Bhasin and Mr. Goswami to give mementos to our esteemed judges, Justice Leela Seth. Mrs. Devki Jain. Justice Mukul Mudgal. We would like Sagarika Ghosh also to come up to collect her memento. I think she's gone to write the article. So we will give it to her after this. May I request Mr. Bhasin to present a memento to our chief guest? Mr. Anil Goswami. And there is a very special memento which Mr. Bhasin will talk about.
Special memento for a very, very special person without whom this event would not have been possible. Special memento for Dr. Kavita Sharma.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, all of you. I'll just say a few vote of thanks. Yeah. I just want to say thank you, a big thank you to all of you for being here and being with us for the debate, and to the speakers. And I have a very special thanks to our sponsors, without whom this debate would not have been possible. The Times of India and Mr. Ravi Dhariwal, big thank you to you. NTPC and Mr. Arup Roy Chaudhary, big thank you. State Bank, thank you. Sudhir Seth and Sudhir Jenset, big thank you. Pradeep Jain and Silver Glades, thank you so much. To Sanjay Singh and Tata Services, thank you. And to the Hyatt. May I now request all of you to join us for dinner. The bar will be open till 9:50 only. Thank you. Please join us. And you have to walk down to the right to the Regency Ballroom where the bar and dinner is set up.